One of the worst things you can have happen on your farm is when your crop falls over. So whether we're talking about corn lodging, wheat, even soybeans, like the soybean field we're standing in here, Darren and I were just talking about that a little bit ago, that you know what, even in soybeans we can have issues, and you see a difference with varieties.
Well, when we look at soybean varieties, one of the things that we'll see ratings on is standability. And so one variety may be a real high yielder, but the seed company says, well, we've got some lodging issues with that variety. Well, one of the reasons that it lodges is it has such a high demand for fertility right during the reproductive phases as it's trying to fill those high energy pods. So soybeans need a lot of potassium in a real hurry at those stages of growth. Now, when you have a racehorse variety like that apparently has some lodging issues, well, we just need to have more fertility available for that crop. So many times the seed company will say, don't plant it into the heavy clays, because in those heavy, tight clays, that's where we see lodging. Well, why do we see lodging? One of the reasons why is because we can't extract the potassium out of that soil quickly enough to feed that soybean plant.
But see, that's where I completely disagree on this thing, and that's where you got to look at the soil test. So the people that tell you, oh, your soil won't release potassium, well, the reason why it won't release potassium is look at your base saturation test. Unless you get that potassium level up into that 4 to 8% range, you're going to have issues with potassium deficiency.
But that's the challenge. In those heavy clay soils, we may have thousands of parts per million of calcium, thousands of parts per million of magnesium. So yes, to get the potassium up there, we may say, well, it looks like it's really good. We got 150 parts per million of potassium. But in relation to those super high levels of calcium and magnesium, possibly even high levels of organic matter out in that soil where we just have tremendous holding capacity, we may have a real low percentage of potassium. So every time that plant is grabbing nutrients, it's not getting nearly enough potassium in relation to the other things.
So again, we don't care if we're talking about lodging with corn, with soybeans, with wheat, with any crop out there. The most important thing you need to do is get a good soil test. Then take a look at potassium number one by far and away. You got to get that up into the 4 to 8% range. You do that first. Then you take a look at your copper and your manganese and get those up into decent levels as well. And once you've done that on the fertility side, you're going to see dramatic differences on your farm. Now, there are other things that you've got to consider as well. Picking the right variety has little to do with it, in my opinion. Okay, yes, in bad conditions, if I've got bad soil and I got lots of compaction and every other problem, then the variety does make a difference.
It's the Band-Aid.
Right.
You have to look at that. All right, I've got serious issues out in my field. I better pick the thing that has the most roots possible, because that's my only chance
But
of
our
standability.
point is, hey, if I've got great drainage, I have reduced my compaction issue, I have great fertility levels, especially on potassium, copper, and manganese, I've done all those things, then I'm just trying to say the variety isn't going to make that much difference. Everything is going to stand pretty well.
All right, let's talk about corn rootworm. This is one that gets blamed a lot for lodging issues, and rightly so in many cases. I was in a field earlier this summer where the corn, there were some plants that were starting to fall over. And the farmer said, well, you know, we've gotten so much wind. We had a big 60-mile-an-hour wind that came through here last weekend, and that's when I started to see this lodging issue. But when I grabbed onto the plants, I could just swing them side to side. They had virtually no roots underneath. The farmer tried to save some money using a non-BT corn product because the seed was considerably cheaper and he was trying to keep his costs down low. Unfortunately, he didn't apply any insecticide out there. And he said, well, I hadn't really seen a rootworm problem for years. Yes, you'd been using a corn rootworm BT product, so you probably aren't going to see a whole lot of pressure, but he hadn't been using insecticide. So chances are, if you've not been using a full rate of insecticide on your corn, you're probably slowly starting to build some rootworm numbers out in your fields. You really do need to watch that. If rootworms are an issue in your area, make sure you're using an insecticide or at least a BT product.
Another thing that could possibly hurt you is disease. So especially if disease sets in real early in the season, that could damage your roots, could damage your stalks. So there are a lot of things that we want you to look at here.
Well, in addition to disease, we had some areas of the country that had very wet spring. And if you had very wet conditions and you're just constantly getting inundated with rain, you may have a root system that's very shallow. We're much more prone to seeing lodging issues in those areas.
Yeah, but that's why, again, I come back to the first thing you got to do is drainage, then you got to look at your fertility, and you got to address your compaction issues. You take care of all those things, and pretty soon, hey, I don't care what crop you raise, I don't care what variety you have, you're going to have much better stalks, much better standability, a much better root system, and lodging is going to be a lot less of a problem in the future.
Keeping your corn or any crop standing upright definitely helps your yield, and it helps the speed of harvest too. The other thing that it can do, if you've got a great crop canopy out there, is stop our weed of the week. We'll show you some other methods of stopping it as well, coming up later in the show.